Hello, welcome to Come Learn with Paula. I'm so glad you'll be joining me today. We are in Matthew chapter 14. So grab your Bibles, open them up, turn to Matthew 14, and we will get started. And if you've missed any of the past videos, you know you can go to my channel, check on playlists, go to Matthew, and then just pick the one you want to watch. Okay, well, we will get started. And today we are going to use the NIV Quiet Time Bible. I like their questions. Sometimes they're really good. And so today we will be taking the questions on passage Matthew 14. Okay, it starts out with, crises are uncomfortable. Isn't that the truth? They force us to make painful decisions even when we don't want to decide. In Matthew 14, Jesus places the disciples in tough situations where they must act on what they have learned about him. The focus shifts from parables about the kingdom to the identity of the king. Okay, so we're progressing here. What we've learned in the past, now we need to use it for the glory of God. Okay, and warming up to God, it says, teachers use tests during our school years, but tests are not limited to school. God also uses tests throughout our lives. How do you think you've been tested lately? Okay, well, you might want to put it in the comment section down below. I know that we all are being tested, and if you are God's, if you are part of the family of God, you can be sure that God tests us and tries our faith so that we know that our faith is true, right? He knows whether or not we are truly believing, but when we go through a trial, that's when the rubber meets the road, right? That's when you really know whether or not your faith is true. So they're important. Okay, our first question for today, it says in verses 1 through 2, Herod speculates about Jesus's identity. What led him to believe that Jesus is John the Baptist? In verses 3 through 12. So we're going to read actually 1 through 12, and I think we'll stop and answer the question in the middle. Okay, Matthew 14. At that time, Herod the tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him." So, you know, what just happened? He had was thinking back about the time when he had John killed, right? And I'll read on, so I guess it's in this passage. Now, Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered him a prophet. So, you know, John was calling him out in his sin, and he didn't want to hear it, right? Verse 6, on Herod's birthday, so this is on his birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for them and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oath and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted, and the head had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took the body and buried it, and then they went and told Jesus. Okay, so I think it was the last week or two, we were talking about how John came to Jesus and said, "Are you truly the Messiah?" You know, and he was doubting because he was in jail. And Jesus said, "Look at all the miracles I do." Yes, of course I am. And John couldn't quite understand it because I think he thought he would be ruling and reigning with Christ, right? He didn't know either probably that the kingdom, he was here to suffer, right? And John was also at the point of suffering, but you know, his work was complete. His work had been completed, and then he was beheaded. He died a very quick death, but it is sad, right, that Herod took his life just to please a crowd. And so now Herod's feeling bad about it because he knows John was a good person and he had him killed. So he's like, "Oh, he's back. He's haunting me. He came back as Jesus." So that's what he thinks. And our next question goes on, but so let's just talk about this just a second. You know, it was, who did he bring? There's two other passages, both in Mark and in John. It talks about this passage and the other ones we'll be reading today. And, you know, In Mark 6, verse 21, it says, "Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee." So he invited all the prestigious people to the banquet. And so I just think it's interesting how the time was and what was given and what was accepted and what was done, right? But everything was done according to God's time. Okay, we're going to go to the next passage and we're going to see when Jesus feeds a large crowd. And then our third question kind of comes back and compares the two. So let's go ahead and do the next question. It says, how is the feeding of the 5,000 in verses 13 through 21 a test for the disciples? Okay, so we're not spending a lot of time on all these, but these are good questions for us to think about. So let's read verses 13 through 21. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. So, he was very sad. John had been beheaded and he was mourning the grief of this, and he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. So he didn't get long. He just got a minute, right? And when Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Okay, so he didn't just say, "Hey, I'm mourning and I really can't help you right now." He said, "Oh yeah, I'll have compassion on you and I'll heal your sick and I'll do what's right. I'll do what's right. I'm sad, but at the same time, ministering to other people will help you in your sadness." Have you ever found that to be true? Like if you put away your sorrow and you spend some time focusing on someone else and helping someone else, it helps a little bit. It gives you a little bit of purpose and joy in just giving someone else what they need. Okay, so that's what he did. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." Like, put it right back on them, right? It says, Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me." And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. We always give thanks for what we have, what God provides for us, right? But then he broke it and something beautiful happened in the breaking. So he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Okay, so our question here is, how is the feeding of the 5,000 a test for the disciples? So I just thought this is an interesting question because we don't usually look at it from this perspective. But as Jesus had those 5 loaves and 2 fishes, he offered them to the Father, he broke them, and then passed them out. And I'm just thinking that as he passed them out, each person was tested in that they got a portion of that. And I guess it probably multiplied in the basket as they were walking to the crowd. So they had to trust that they had something to give, right? There was nothing maybe in the basket. And then by the time they got to the crowd, it would have multiplied. And the people, it says in another passage that they all were satisfied. They all had enough to eat. Nobody was hungry. And so what a privilege. But also they had to step out in faith in that, Jesus, do you see how many people are here? And here we're just multiplying bread. How is this going to work? They had to walk it out. And sometimes that's what we have to do. Even before we see the miracle, we have to just walk in it. And I'm reminded of the lepers that he healed. When they were healed, they had to go and tell the priest, and as they were going to tell the priest, they were healed. So sometimes we need to walk out in our faith. And even remember the ark, the water didn't stop for Moses until they put their foot in the water with the ark, like we're ready to go, and then they stepped foot in and then the seas parted, right? So there is a bit of faith that is required on our part oftentimes before we see a miracle. So don't forget that. If God is saying, okay, I hear you, I do want to give you this miracle, what is your part? Like, where do you step out in faith? Because we all need to step out in faith. And so that's what the disciples did by just carrying their baskets to the people and having them sit down and having them take the food. That was an act of faith, knowing that God was just going to keep it coming until over 5,000 people were fed. That's a lot of people, right? Okay, and we are going to move on from here. So I want to just say a couple things about this. I love this passage, Jesus multiplying. Just point out a few little details. One is that Jesus uses the little things that we have. There wasn't much bread and there weren't many fish, but he took it and multiplied it. So when you think, I don't have enough to give to anybody, he'll take what little you have and he'll multiply it to meet the need. So don't underestimate the ability of God to take our little and multiply it. And then also, I put here, multiplying comes with the breaking. Like, he broke the bread and then it was multiplied. That's kind of the way it is in our lives. We're broken. We have to be broken and yielded. And once we're broken and yielded, then God will multiply and he will use us for his glory, right? But it all comes after a heart surrender, after we've surrendered and say, God, I can't, but I know you can. And that's when God works. So just be encouraged that, where you are going to be multiplied, going to be used, you will first have a breaking so that you're ready, so that you can receive the blessing. Okay, here's another point. God provided the leftover so they could remember the miracle in their next storm. So how many baskets were collected? It was 12 baskets. And how many disciples were there? There were 12 disciples, right? So each of them got a basket of food for the next day. And their next day was going to be hard. And so they had that food probably sitting in front of them. And that would be a reminder that, hey, God just multiplied the bread and he took care of all those people. He'll take care of us too, right? We need to remember the past miracles when you walk into a present need, right? So if you're in need, think back in your life. Where has God been faithful to you? Where has God helped you? And then go back and visit those times in your heart and just say, Lord, I know you were faithful here. Please be faithful to me today and help me. Show me how to walk in this difficult place that you've put me. Okay. And then lastly, I wanted to point out that the small boy, it was a small boy that gave his food away. How many people would say, this is my lunch. I don't want you to take my lunch, right? I'm the only one that has some food. Don't take it away. But no, he's like, gladly. Yeah, Jesus, you can have it. You can have my food. And, when they counted the numbers, there were 5,000 men, but the women and children weren't even counted. So men wouldn't even count the child, right? And yet Jesus used the faith of a little boy to perform this huge miracle. So don't underestimate the value of each life and each person in the economy of God. He uses us all for his glory. And it's the faith like a child that saves us, right? So it's just the child is the one that would be like, yes, I believe, you can have it, do whatever you want to do with it. Yes. And so that's what we need to be like. We just need to have the faith of a child to say yes to the Lord, right? Anyway, it's very beautiful. But in this passage, really the only question we had was the test for the disciples. And I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective, but yes, the disciples had to carry the baskets to each of the people groups that were sat down, which there again, God makes order, right? They could have trampled each other, but they didn't. They all sat down and they waited patiently and all the food came to them. So that's also a message for us, just to have order in our life and to wait patiently on the Lord, right? Be still and know that I am God. Okay, question 3. Herod and Jesus, the two kings in this passage, both serve banquets. What does each king's banquet reveal about his character and authority? Okay, well, Herod was having a birthday party and living it up and having dancing, and then he's giving half of his kingdom away if she wanted it, and she wants the head of John, and he's pressured by the people, And he upholds his oath, and he has his head brought in, just kind of revelry and debauchery, and it ends in death. And then Jesus, the people just come to him, and it's not all the high officials, it's everybody, anybody, large and small, rich and poor, big and little, right? Everybody came to Jesus, and Jesus fed them all, and Jesus took care of them all, and all of them were amazed. Like at the end of the day, they were all wanting more food and wanting more Jesus, right? They were just amazed. So quite a different scenario. And the thing about Jesus's party was he worked supernaturally to provide abundantly above all they could ask or imagine. So yes, we want to go to the banquet of Jesus, right? And it is better than the banquet of kings. And I've never really heard those two compared either, that, we had King Herod, and then we have King Jesus, and boy, they were just night and day, weren't they? And but it's interesting because that's what man values, and then what God values. God values the heart, and God values having compassion on all people. So quite a difference. Okay, question number 4. We're going to move on to after Jesus puts them in a boat, after feeding the 5,000, sends them out in the water. Okay, so it says, number 4, imagine you are in the boat with the anxious disciples. Describe what you could see and hear and feel. So we're just going to read verses 22 through 26. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. So you can just imagine, he's like, okay, go on, you guys get in the boat and go, just row on over. I'll be fine. I'm going to go up and pray. But he's got to dismiss, 10,000 people. And so they all leave, and he finally goes up on the mountainside and he prays. He wants to be alone with the Father. His heart is still broken. He had been interrupted earlier, and he needed to spend time with God, right? So everybody's doing what they're told to do, what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. But when evening came, they were alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by waves, because the wind was against them. Okay, and in another passage it says they were 3.5 miles out. So during the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Okay, so the 4th watch is from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So, that's the time that it's hard to stay awake, right? If you're staying up all night, that's the really tough time. 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., they're still rowing in a boat, and there's a big wind against them, and they are not making much progress at all, right? And so Jesus comes out to him walking on the boat. He's like, okay, I'm finished praying. I'm going to go check on the disciples, go to our next place. And he's just walking on the water. Okay, let's see what happens next. During the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Okay, so let's talk about this. It's dark. You probably can't see very much, right? And then you see this figure walking towards you, and you know that nobody can walk on water, right? And then they are like, it's a ghost. And then he gets closer, and they notice him, and it's Jesus. And he's walking on the water. And so everybody, there's 11 people that are just scared. And then Peter's like, okay, if it's you, then let me come out to you. Let me walk on the water too. Like, if you can do it, I can do it, right? You'll help me to do it. So he gets out of the boat and he walks on the water until he takes his eyes off Jesus, right? He looks to the waves, he looks right and left, and he's scared. Well, I guess I would be scared too. And he starts to sink. And then he says, Lord, save me. And you know, I love these kind of prayers. Sometimes this is the kind of prayer, only the kind of prayer you have time to pray. Help me. And so he's like, Lord, help me. And Jesus reaches out his hand and he lifts him up and they get into the boat. What a beautiful picture, right? I love to see this. And let's read our next question. It says, How is Peter's trying experience on the water a vivid picture of faith and doubt? Okay, so faith. He had faith that Jesus would let him walk on the water, that he could do it. If Jesus was doing it, I can do it. You'll do greater things than I'm doing, right? So he gets out of the boat. He's like, yeah, I have faith. But then he took his eyes off Jesus. He looked at the waves. Maybe one crashed over his leg. It was scary. And he looked and he's like, I can't walk on water. What am I doing? And he starts to drown. He starts to go down into the water. And he's like, Lord, help me. And then let's read the rest of it because I don't think we read that part. Then, okay, 33. Then those who were, better go back. Let's start at 30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. When they had crossed over, they landed in Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. All who touched him were healed. Not everybody was healed, but only those who touched him were healed. Okay, so going back to our situation here, it says, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the winds died down. Then all those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Wow. So this scene does show Peter's faith, and it also shows Peter's doubt. But wow, what a beautiful picture of our life with Jesus. With God, we can walk on water. Without God, we sink in the water. But with God, we walk on water. Okay, we're going to apply the word. And this first one, it says, when are you more tempted to take your eyes off the Lord and to sink in doubt? Well, probably when it's hard. we take our eyes off and look at things that we shouldn't look at, and then we're in doubt. I'm mindful right now. There's so much in the news, so much, kingdom against kingdom, so much war and fighting. And, if you spend all your time watching that, all your faith just goes out the window, right? You have to turn it off and put your nose in the Bible and pray and talk to the Lord and keep your eyes on Jesus, and you won't falter, you won't fall, and you'll be able to walk through this time that we're in. But if we just look at the circumstances, we will definitely walk in doubt. And so we don't want to do that. And this is a good reminder for all of us that we need to spend time with the Lord, spend time in prayer, take everything that you see and hear to the Lord in prayer, pray for the countries, pray for the people, but then give your trust and your dependence on the Lord, because he's the only one that can see us through difficult times, right? And he will, he'll lift us up. Immediately he caught Peter. Like, he didn't let him fall all the way in. He caught him. And then they got into the boat. And when they got into the boat, everything was calm. That's unusual, right? Okay, let's look at our next question. Number 2, in verse 33, the disciples worshiped Jesus and declared, truly, you are the Son of God. What do you see in this incident that leads you to worship Jesus? Okay, well, I love to talk about the miracles. Let's look at the miracles. Well, first of all, he walked on water, which is defying physics, right? Space and time and physics. I mean, he was probably walking quickly and making time and going over the water. And that is a miracle. And then he said, Peter, come on out. And he did, he came out, and Peter walked on water. So that's also a miracle. And then He caught him. And when he got in the boat, what happened? The winds died down and the waves died down. Like, he's Lord over the storm. And another passage says that when he got in the boat, they immediately were at the other shore. So they time traveled. They just went really fast. And so all of these things only God could do. Only God could do. They're miracles. They're beyond our physical ability. And so, yes, he is God. And yes, we should worship him as God. And that made them want to worship him. And we should worship him today. And, you know, we limit ourselves and we limit God, and we shouldn't do that. You know, with God, nothing is impossible. He will provide a way, and he will make a way where there seems to be no way, right? But we have to ask him, Lord, help us. And we've got to trust and have faith that he will, and watch him work, because he will. Okay, praise the Lord. Our last question for the day is, how can these things help you to trust Jesus the next time you're tempted to doubt? And then we need to spend a few minutes worshiping Jesus, the Son of God. Okay, so if we can think back on these times where God has provided in the past, we will be assured that God will provide in the future, right? That's where we got to take our thoughts captive, conform them to the image of Christ, put on the full armor of God, stand firm in who you are in Christ, and then wait and watch and see the salvation of the Lord, right? He doesn't need our help, but if he tells us to do something, we obey. But if we're just to sit there and wait and watch, then we need to just be patient and sit there and wait and watch and recount the goodness of the Lord. Because just like he fed the 5,000 people, then he puts them in the boat and they have a huge struggle, a physical, you know, I'm sure their muscles were tired, their eyes were tired, their bodies were tired. They were wet and just at their wits' end, thinking, what do? We cannot get across this boat, this water, because of the wind. And then Jesus shows up and he just shines, right? He just shines. So we just need to press on in our difficult places and trust that God will see us through. And he will. And then this says, respond in prayer by spending a few minutes worshiping God, worshiping Jesus, the Son of God. So, you know, if you haven't done that today, spend a few moments and just, we worship you, Lord. We praise you, God. You are mighty. You are powerful. Nothing is too difficult for you. And you love us and you help us, and we give you praise and worship. So that's what we need to do with our time and with our day, is take little moments and thank God for the beautiful flowers that you see, the beautiful trees and sky, and you know, the water that we have. Just anything that you have, just thank the Lord for it and give him and worship him for who he is. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed our study. What a beautiful picture of how you know, Herod's party and Jesus's banquet were completely different, and then the difficult times where God comes through and shines. Okay, take care. Until next time, I hope you have a great week. Bye.